Today's date is March the 26th, 1999, and we're on the record at 8:34 a.m. This is a video deposition of Mr. Edward Ivey for the Airport Marriott Hotel in Romulus, Michigan. This is a matter of Jones versus General Motors Corporation. Counsel, can you put your appearance in the record, please?
Yes, Bruce Petway for the plaintiffs.
John Overchuck for the plaintiffs.
Bud Kirk, representing General Motors.
Dan Gerber, representing General Motors.
Sir, would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do so swear.
State your name, please.
Edward Charles Ivey?
Mr. Ivey, are you employed with General Motors Corporation?
Yes.
I've marked your personnel file as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1, and I would like to show you an excerpt from that personnel file and ask you, marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1A, and ask you if you can identify that document, please, sir.
Okay, I don't know if that's part of the personnel file, but
It's going to be Plaintiff's 1A. It was produced to me with it. And if you would, can you identify that document, Mr. Ivey?
Yes, it's an organization chart that's dated August 1st, 1990.
Okay, and are you identified on that organizational chart?
Yes, I am.
And what is your position on the organizational chart as of August 1990?
I was the director of J Engineering.
Okay, and you understand that the J car includes the 1991 Pontiac Sunbird that we're here about in this case today?
Yes.
Okay. I also want to show you a second excerpt from that file.
to which again I'm going to object. I don't know that the org charts are part of his personnel file.
Well, this is that I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 1B, and you may want to let your attorney look at that. Can you identify that document, Mr. Ivey?
Yes, I've seen it before.
Does it seem to be an excerpt from your personnel file?
All I have to tell you, I've seen this in courts more than once, but I haven't. You don't normally go in and look at your own personnel file.
Okay.
So if General Motors gave it to you, I'd have to assume it's part of that.
Okay, it was. It was produced in this case, Bates number 18592, and I would just like to direct your attention to the entries for April 1990 and February 1991, where your position and title are listed. If you could tell us what that position and title was in 1990 and 91.
The title is Manager, J-Car Engineering.
Okay. And was that in fact your position back in that time frame in 90 and 91? You were the manager over the whole J-Car Engineering section?
Yes.
And that did include the Pontiac Sunbird?
Yes. You made note of the fact of section. Basically, in doing that, it's a coordination role. There's no, really didn't have any, for example, J-Car engineers reporting to me or anything like that.
Well, the position title is correct. You were the manager of J-Car Engineering?
Yes.
Okay. And that included the Pontiac Sunbird?
Wait, which one? What
1991, 90 and 91.
When I had the job, during that date, that approximately 1 year period, I was the manager of the J-Car Engineering.
And that 1 year was in 1990 and 91, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Now, I'm going to show you what I have marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 2, a 4-page document. Plaintiff's Exhibit 2, A, B, C, and D. And ask you first if from time to time in your employment at GM you did what were known as employee development program interviews.
Well, frankly, I don't know the titles, but usually on a yearly basis we had employee appraisals by your supervisor.
Okay, and what that would be is the supervisor would come in and talk to you and appraise you about the work you'd done in the previous year, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I want to show you, you want to look at this? I want to show you this 4-page document, which was produced by General Motors in this case, and ask you if on the 4th page this is your signature, Mr. E.C. Ivey.
Yes, that's my signature.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you if Mr. Wallace, Mr. J.R. Wallace, did this particular employee development interview. Here, let you look at that.
Well, looking at the time and the signature here, yes, Mr. Wallace would have done this.
Was Mr. Wallace the person you reported to or who was over you back in that time period?
Back in 1973, the first part of 1973, I worked for Mr. Wallace.
For Mr. Wallace, okay. And what is the date when you signed and Mr. Wallace signed this General Motors Employee Development Program interview?
Well, there's no date associated exactly with our signatures, but on the first page it says the date of this appraisal. It's dated September 24th, 1973.
Okay.
So I'd have to assume that's when we signed it.
Okay, so the date of the employee development interview is September 24, 1973, correct?
That's what's on the document.
And does the document indicate that the interview you did was for the previous 11 months of service at GM prior to September 24th, 1973?
Well, I worked in advanced design for approximately a year. I don't remember the dates exactly. This would have been a review of the work that I did during that time.
Okay. So this review was for the 11 months prior to September 24 of 1973, correct?
Well, like I said, I don't remember the exact dates. It was approximately a year.
Okay. Let me just point your attention to the top corner of this document. It says length of time under present supervisor or in present position, and it indicates on that document that you're talking about an 11-month period, correct?
Then that's probably correct. Yeah.
Okay. And what did Mr. Wallace, who you were reporting to at this time, supervise?
He was the manager of in advanced design, and all of the engineers that were in advanced design worked for him.
Okay. And you were an engineer in advanced design in 1973?
Yes, I was.
So you worked for Mr. Wallace?
Yes.
That would be fair. Would it be fair to say you reported to Mr. Wallace?
Yes, I did.
Okay. Now, I want to direct your attention to the portion of this employee development program interview that says summary of employees' current responsibilities. And there it says that, and this is handwritten, by the way. Do you recognize that printing? Is that Mr. Wallace's printing?
I can't say.
Can't say? Okay. But there on your interview, in the summary of your current responsibilities in 73 and for the 11 months prior, it says that you were to follow advanced design projects as assigned, mathematically analyze designs as required, and report results. Is that an accurate statement of what your job was in 1973?
Yes, that was basically the job.
And when it says report results, were you reporting those results of these mathematical analyzations or analysis to Mr. Wallace? Would that be a fair statement? Is that how it worked?
Well, depends on where the project came from. So in some cases the projects were assigned by Mr. Wallace from other people, and you would give your report to them rather than directly to Mr. Wallace.
Okay. Right. Now, Mr. Ivey, I want to show you a document that I marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 and ask you if you can identify this document, please, sir.
Yes, I can identify this.
Okay? And the title of that document is Value Analysis of Auto Fuel Fed Fire-Related Fatalities, correct?
Yes.
And your signature is on the second page of that document, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Is that your correct signature?
Yes.
Okay. And the date of that document under your signature is June 29 of 1973, correct?
Yes.
Now, did you in fact write this value analysis?
I wrote this document, yes.
And when you wrote this value analysis, were you in fact employed as a project engineer for advanced design at Oldsmobile?
Yes.
And when you wrote this value analysis, were you at GM on their facility physically? I mean, you were in your office there at Advanced Design.
Yes.
Okay. And did you actually dictate the document or write it by hand?
Back then, we didn't really do any dictation, so I would have written it out by hand.
So you sat down when you were in Advanced Design in 1973 and wrote the value analysis by hand at General Motors in your office, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then you gave it to, and I've seen the lady's name and I don't have it. Is it Sue?
No.
Pam?
The secretary in the department is named Pam Ballard.
Pam Ballard.
Right.
Then you gave your handwritten notes to Pam Ballard to type, is that correct?
Yes.
And Pam Ballard was employed as a secretary by General Motors Corporation, correct?
Yes.
And Ms. Ballard then typed and returned the typed version to you, is that correct?
Yes, I don't remember that happening exactly, but that would have been what would have happened.
That's how it worked.
Because I signed it.
Right.
After it was typed.
In other words, you went to work, went to your office, wrote this analysis out, took it to Ms. Ballard,
Yes.
and she typed it and gave it back to you, correct?
Yes.
And she was at work for General Motors.
Yes.
And then you signed it, and that's the copy we have here today.
Yes.
Okay. Now, is the date correct on that document?
All I can say is that that's the only date I've ever seen on this document, so I have to assume it's correct date.
Okay. Would you consider the contents of this document to be a mathematical analysis?
No, I guess in related to the job description that you had before, I wouldn't consider this a mathematical analysis. There is math in here, but I guess when you talk about mathematical analysis, I would think more of a computer type analysis work that would be more sophisticated than this. I did some of that when I was in advanced design.
Okay, you did computer. I saw that in your file. You were versed in computers all the way back in the 70s.
Yes.
That wasn't as common as it is now.
That's true.
And, but you would agree with me, certainly this is an analysis. It's titled a value analysis of auto fuel fed fire-related fatalities, correct?
Yes, but you asked would it be a mathematical analysis, and I just made note that talking about comparing it to your notation of the job description, there is math. It is analysis. I'm not denying any of that. I'm just saying it wouldn't have been what I would consider a mathematical analysis.
Okay. You anticipated my next question. It is an analysis, and there is math involved. There's some multiplication, and I know you're an engineer, and I'm not, but that is math, at least from my perspective. Okay. Now, let's look at the value analysis itself. And in the first portion of your first analysis, you state in this document that in GM automobiles, there are a maximum of 500...
Microphone, sir, sorry.
There are a maximum of 500 fatalities per year in accidents with fuel-fed fires where the bodies were burnt. Is that correct?
That's what's written there, yes.
And that's what you wrote, is that correct?
Yes.
Then you go on to state in your analysis, and it's number 2, each fatality has a value of $200,000. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then you go on to say that there are approximately 41 million GM automobiles currently operating on U.S. highways. Is that correct?
Yes.
Then you go on to state that analyzing these figures indicates that fatalities related to accidents with fuel-fed fires are costing General Motors $2.40 per automobile in current operation. Is that correct?
Well, that's what's written, but that's an incorrect conclusion from this.
Okay. But you would agree with me that the typed version of your value analysis that you signed states, analyzing these figures indicates that fatalities related to accidents with fuel-fed fires are costing General Motors $2.40 per automobile in current operation, correct?
That's what's written.
Now, you then go on and you actually, the math part we were talking about, do what looks like, to me, a calculation. You take 500 fatalities, multiply that number by $200,000 per fatality, and then divide by the 41 million automobiles that General Motors had on the road, correct?
That's the calculation.
Okay, and the result of that calculation written in this document is $2.40 per automobile, correct?
That's what's written, yes.
Now, as far as, had you ever seen the $200,000 figure that you used in the second line of this first analysis where you say each fatality has a value of $200,000 prior to sitting down and writing this document, Mr. Ivey?
Yes, I got that number. That number is an NHTSA figure, a government figure from the Transportation Board that the U.S. government uses for societal harm. That's a $200,000 figure, came from a government document.
Had you ever seen that number in a General Motors document prior to sitting down and writing the value analysis?
No.
Let me show you what I've marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 4, or Exhibit 4, to your deposition.
Well, make note that I've never seen this document before.
Okay. Let me direct your attention to the fact that you would agree with me that is a General Motors document, would you not?
It looks like a General Motors document. It's got the GM logo at the top.
It says General Motors engineering staff, doesn't it?
Yes.
And you would agree with me the date of that document is March 28, 1974, would you not?
That's what's on here, yes.
You would agree with me that that was less than 1 year after you wrote your value analysis that we're discussing, is that correct?
Yes.
I want to point your attention to, by the way...
Would you let him read the document if you're going to inquire as to the contents of it? I think you should be able to read it.
Certainly, absolutely. And I would want to ask you, if you would, to just look at the second page. That document is signed, very hard to read, but it does have his name typed under it by an R.G. Fisher. Do you know Mr. Fisher?
No,
Ever worked with him at General Motors?
no, I don't know that name at all.
How about the man that this document was addressed to, Mr. F.M. Coffey? Do you know Mr. Coffey?
I've heard the name, but
Frank Coffey?
Yeah, I've heard the name, but I don't.
You know he worked at General Motors there.
Like I said, I've heard the name over the years. So I could, relate that. Yes, I've heard that, but I don't know that I've ever met him.
Okay. Do you need time to familiarize yourself with that, to read the
Yeah,
document?
let me.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to point your attention to the topic or the subject of this General Motors engineering staff document is MVSS 301 amendments. Is that correct?
That's noted in the document.
And that has to do with fuel systems, does it not?
Matter of fact, I don't know what MVSS 301 is. It has to do with crash performance in one of the tests, I guess. I'm not familiar with exactly what test that is.
Would you agree with me that Mr. Fisher and Mr. Coffey in this General Motors document are discussing fuel systems and fuel system integrity?
Yes.
Just as your memo less than a year earlier, you, in your value analysis, were discussing fuel systems, weren't you?
Well, I talked about fuel-fed fire-related stuff. So in my document that I wrote back then, it actually doesn't say anything about fuel systems in the document.
You're discussing deaths from fuel-fed fires in your document, correct? In your value.
Yes, deaths associated with fuel-fed fires. Yeah.
And in this General Motors engineering staff document, I want to direct your attention to the calculation that was done about 2/3 down the first page. Would you agree with me first, just generally, that this calculation is very similar to your calculation in your value analysis?
Well, reading this, I don't know that I understood how he derived all these things, but since a lot of it's not attributed here, but it's obviously similar.
It has an assumption, and you made assumptions in your value analysis, didn't you?
Yes.
And one of the assumptions made by Mr. Fisher is that there are 600 deaths by fire a year. You used the figure 500 deaths a year in your analysis, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I think that if you read his, the 600 deaths he uses is the total, not GM, but that's the total deaths by fire. And on mine, the 500 is a maximum that I note. And the 600 here would be all cars in this case. Where mine was 500, I said the maximum could be in GM would be 500. And that 500 is half of the numbers that I had at the top of my report, which were 650 to 1,000. So I used 1,000 and I took half of that.
Okay. So you have different numbers. I agree with that. But would you agree with me that you both started your assumptions for your calculation by taking the number of deaths by fire per year?
Yes.
Okay. Then you went on, and your second assumption is each fatality has a value of $200,000, and Mr. Fisher's second assumption is the cost of each fatality is $200,000, correct?
That's what he has in here, yes.
Then you both look to the number of General Motors cars on the road in doing the calculation, didn't you?
He uses a figure, in this case, of cars that are produced each year is the number that he uses, rather than the cars on the road.
Right, and we didn't get to your second analysis, and we will, but in your second analysis, in your value analysis, you look to the number of cars per year General Motors put on the road, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And in his analysis, Mr. Fisher, less than a year later, looked to the number of GM cars' average yearly production, didn't he?
Yes.
Okay. And you also looked to, well, let's go to you multiplied the number of fatalities times the number you assessed to each fatality and divided by, in your first analysis, total automobiles, and in your second analysis, automobiles per year, didn't you?
Yes.
Would you agree with me that Mr. Fisher, less than a year later, on this GM document, took the number of deaths times the same 200,000 value per death, he calls it a cost, and then multiplied that times a percentage of the deaths attributed to fuel-fed fires and divided it by the number of cars on the road?
Yes, that's what he did. Yes.
So the only difference in his calculation and your calculation is he didn't stop at multiplying the number of deaths times the cost or value assessed to the death, but he then came in and multiplied a percentage of those deaths attributed to fuel-fed fires.
As best I can tell, that's what he did.
That's a fair statement, isn't it? So other than adding those
You never had a chance to answer that, and when he asked the question, is that a fair statement, you can say, yes, it is, or I don't know.
Okay.
Okay. Had you finished your answer? I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I don't know that there's a lot of difference with what he did. I don't know, like I said before, I don't know that I really understand how he did these calculations, but it is obviously similar to the calculation I made.
Okay. It is similar. Yes, sir. That was my question. Now, the result he got in the amount per car was also very similar to yours, wasn't it?
His calculation produced a similar number.
In Mr. Fisher's memo, after doing the calculation we're discussing, he gets $2 per car and then puts in the memo effectively for rear impact protection. This would be used up in fuel for additional weight required. Is that correct?
That's what's written here, yes.
Okay. Yes, sir. And in that last paragraph, you state that you really can't put a value on a human life, can you?
I wouldn't.
And you agree with that today, don't you?
Yes.
But you did put a value on a human life in your calculation so that you would have an objective formula to determine the result that you got. Is that a fair way of putting it?
There is a number in here. I used a government figure, which relates to societal cost, not General Motors cost.
Yes, sir. Now, I want to direct your attention.
If you're changing topics, I'd like to take a 5-minute break.
I'm not, but we can certainly take a 5-minute break.
Okay.
All right.
Going off the record at 9:32.
Because I'd stop my watch for one of those.
Back on the record, 9:40 a.m.
Now, Mr. Ivey, we've taken a break, and I want to direct your attention to Exhibit 5 again. The General Motors Estimating the Benefit and Automotive Safety Cost-Benefit Analysis, and ask you if you would look to the last page of that document, please, sir. Is that a distribution sheet?
That's the way it's titled, yes.
Does the distribution sheet actually even list the number of copies that went to each individual that got this report?
Yes.
And I want to direct your attention to the third to bottom line. Did Mr. J.B. Ridenour of Oldsmobile Division get one copy of this document entitled Estimating the Benefit and Automotive Safety Cost-Benefit Analysis?
That's what's on the distribution page.
According to the distribution sheet. Now, you know Mr. Ridenour, don't you?
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, just 3 weeks before you wrote your value analysis of automotive fuel-fed fires, you were meeting and discussing fuel tank designs with Mr. Ridenour, weren't you?
I was working on a fuel tank location project with Mr. Ridenour.
Let me show you a document that I have marked as Exhibit 6 to your deposition, and it is entitled 1977 Fuel Tank Design Discussion, and the date June 6, 73 is over your name, E.C. Ivey, and ask you if you've ever seen that document before, please, sir.
Do you have Exhibit 1B?
Yes, I've seen this document.
And in fact, you wrote this document, didn't you?
I don't remember writing it, but it's got my name on it, so I believe that I did.
Okay. You don't disagree with that? Your name is typed at the bottom of the document, the third page, isn't it?
Yes.
And it's over the date June 6, 1973.
Yes.
And June 6, 1973 would be just 3 weeks before you wrote your June 29, 1973 value analysis. Is that correct?
Objection repetitious.
You can answer.
Yes.